Welcome, everyone, to today's webcast. I'm glad you're here, joined us today. My name is Nick Cavalanti. I'm a Microsoft MVP with Tech Evangelism. I'm joined today by Jeff. Jeff, is it Piot or Pio? I don't know how to say your last name, and I forgot to ask.
That's Pew.
Pio. See, I've got them both wrong. See, he's the VP of Microsoft and Strategic Partnerships over at GSX. Jeff, thank you for joining me today. I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, well,
But I'm glad to be here too with you, Nick.
Yes, we're going to have a good time today. For those of you in the audience today, before we get started, if you have any questions, stick those into the Q&A box. We'll be happy to answer those at the end of today's webcast, so be sure to do that as well. Also, the format for today is a little different. Instead of it being death by PowerPoint, which is what I know you're used to seeing on most webcasts, this has a very short number of slides. It's mostly discussion format between Jeff and myself. Jeff's got a little bit of demoing he'd like to do in between a little bit to talk about how to address the problems we're going to discuss today in a hybrid exchange environment and try to address service quality in that kind of environment as well. So just sit back, relax. If you don't see the slides moving ahead a whole lot, that's okay, because we're doing a little bit of conversation, focusing on the conversation. And again, if you have questions, comments, and anecdotes, something you just feel like sharing, stick that in the Q&A box, and we will attempt to make sure that we cover that as much as we can as soon as possible. So let's go ahead and jump into our first slide, and let's just talk a little bit about the fact that your hybrid exchange environment is rather complex. And so if you think about the environment, you've got two parts to it. You've got this first part on the left-hand side, which is your on-premises exchange organization. And then as you're going to see in a moment here, you have on the right-hand side, but just hold on a second here, we'll have your Office 365 environment. Now, in the on-prem environment, you already have a number of critical components. You can see four of them listed here. You have your domain controllers, which, of course, for authentication and keeping track of user accounts. That's the basis for your security and who has access to what mailboxes and those kinds of things. You have an Azure AD Connect that's sort of in my upper right-hand corner of your on-prem exchange org there, and that's talking to your Exchange Online environment, and making sure that the two environments, your Azure AD there and your on-premises AD, are actually talking to one another. You've got in sort of the lower left-hand corner your mailbox servers, and focusing mostly on them being a mailbox server. I realize for some of you with smaller environments, they may also be your client access servers. They might also be your mail transport servers, but just focusing on that one role mailbox server, that you've got something there. You might have edge servers and or using a separate mail transport server as well. And if I click ahead from here, of course, I'll see a little bit of synchronization going on between my Exchange Online and my Azure AD and my Azure, AD on-prem. And so that's another part of the components here. As I click forward on the right-hand side, you'll see some of the other services there, like Azure AD. You'll see your Exchange Online instance that exists at the bottom here. Some of you might have Exchange Online protection in place. And then, of course, there's some other services that you may or may not be using. I mentioned the client access servers, and utilizing those as part of an existing physical or virtual server, as the case might be, as well as utilizing AD federated services to sync with some other domains that are not necessarily in your AD environment. So you've got all of these components here. And at the same time, you're basically tasked with a lot of things. So if I click to the next slide, I want to focus in on, if you look at just sort of the right-hand side is where you're going to start seeing nothing's really going on the left-hand side, this particular slide here. But what you see here is that you guys are tasked with a large number of jobs to accomplish when it comes to this entire environment, some of which you can control and some of which you can't control, right? Because it's Office 365 on the right-hand side. You lose always with the cloud visibility and control. Those are the two things that are just synonymous with the cloud. To some degree, you lose those things. But if you look at that list there, you're still somehow looked at by the organization as you're supposed to maintain the availability of all of it. You obviously can't when it comes to Office 365. But you're still sort of tasked with making sure that it stays up and running as much as possible. We, of course, know Microsoft has SLAs in place, but the only recourse is little more than, all right, well, we'll take a little bit of percentage off of your monthly bill, et cetera, something along those lines, which isn't a lot of help. You see things like the efficiency and the productivity of the entire environment. And then, interestingly enough, you think about the consistent experience that's going on, particularly with what's happening right now. Like Microsoft released the E1 license of all of Office 365 to organizations because of the whole issue of the coronavirus, and they're flooded with lots of people on Teams and so on. Well, people that are using on-premises tools, like using a full copy of Teams on a Windows machine, or utilizing a full copy of Outlook on a Windows machine, as the case would be, versus somebody who's maybe on their home laptop using web-based interfaces versions of these, there's still an expectation of a consistent experience no matter what. And then all the while, this ROI factor comes in play for all you guys, where you're trying to figure out how do I make sure that, and it's a summation of really the previous bullets here. If you have availability and efficiency and productivity and so on, you're able to achieve some kind of return on the overall investment. But when you sum all this up, it's that last bit on the right-hand side, simply service quality. If you can maintain service quality for the entire environment, that is the availability, efficiency, productivity, consistent experience, and so on, then you're able to achieve that ROI and so on. So that's really, at the end of the day, what you guys are trying to accomplish is how do I get service quality and ensure that for the entire environment. So Jeff, I've done enough talking for a moment. We have a short number of minutes here. So how big of a challenge is this issue of service quality for your prospective customers?
Well, it's a big one, that's for sure. Just to give you a bit of a context, to GSX, we are expert in synthetic transaction, especially for collaboration environment. So now we are kind of the expert of the synthetic transaction on Office 365 and for hybrid environment as well. So we monitor the service. And for sure, we are working with very large company, and so everything that you said definitely makes sense. That's the feedback we have from all of our large enterprise. What you describe here as a hybrid environment, I mean, it's already complex if you want to maintain a certain quality of service. But on top of that, now you have to add everything that is in between your data center, where you have your Exchange on-prem that are linked with Office 365 and etc. But you have to add everything in between that and the end user. And the end user can be in a remote office, or it can be at home as well. And more people are working from home now. So you have to be able to maintain that service quality, that consistent experience by managing these parts, these environments that you see here with ADFS, Azure AD Connect, and all what you should be for, plus all the different service experience that can happen from multiple ISPs, local IT, any kind of security network or security cloud services that are coming on top of what you see here. And so it's a very big challenge to combine that first complexity of hybrid with the complexity of so many locations, so many ISPs, so many different bandwidth, so many different internet connection and networks. So yes, it's a very big challenge.
Wonderful. Let's do this. And you brought up synthetic transactions, obviously something that's near and dear to GSX's heart. Let's talk about that a little bit on the next slide. If you guys are not familiar with synthetic transactions, I'm going to kind of give you a brief definition. There's actually a blog that I wrote on GSX's website, so you can take a look at that as well. But the concept with synthetic transactions is relatively simple. The idea is, in order to get that, if you look on the right-hand side here, you need visibility, you need to get granular visibility, you need to understand context, especially if you're going to understand what's going on in your environment to achieve all those things we talked about previously, like the availability, the productivity, the efficiencies, and so on. The idea with synthetic transactions is you see there's a little robot that I've got sort of in the middle of the Office 365 tenant there, as it were. The idea is to have a piece of software, a bot, as it were, that actually is pretending to be a user. It's acting as a user, and it's testing out things like, you can see some of the check boxes that I've got, little green check boxes on this slide, where maybe it's checking things like, let me authenticate to Active Directory if I put one of those bots on premises. Or, as you can see in the graphic, I've got a bot that's kind of quote-unquote residing in my Office 365 tenant, meaning it's trying to connect to that one instead, and it's testing authentication of Azure AD, as the case would be. And then looking in the lower left, I've got on the screen here, I maybe have a mailbox server, so maybe I have it testing access to a particular mailbox, or it's trying to do something, create a calendar item, or it's trying to send an email out to somebody and make sure that works, or whatever the case is. The idea with synthetic transactions is we're trying to figure out, by pretending to be, by synthetically acting as the user, as it were, to see what the user experience is like, what the timing is like. Are we getting a response? Is it even working? Those kind of things you end up getting, you can see on the right-hand side again, you get the visibility into what's going on in the environment. So unlike normally if something was to go out on the Exchange 365 side, the most you could do is go to Microsoft and go, hey, something doesn't work or users can't get to their mailboxes. That's it. That's all you know. Maybe you could look in logs, maybe, but in this case, you could actually have much more of a granular visibility into what is and isn't working because you're acting as a user in a far more detailed way, and you get that context. So, Jeff, I gave kind of my own, not very technical, but sort of, topical definition of synthetic transactions. Would you tell our audience sort of how you define it?
Yeah, well, first, I like your definition for sure.
Thanks.
I mean, it's kind of a good one, and I would just add some element of context. Why it's very important, especially when you want to ensure service quality. The thing is that when you want to ensure Office 365 or hybrid service quality on this kind of environment, I mean, you need to make sure that the service is working fine, 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. And the thing is that half of the day is at night. So if you are just relying on end user complaint first, so you have no tool, you just wait for people to complain to know the service quality. First, it will be very difficult because the first thing that even Gartner said that only 16% of the users are now opening a ticket when a SaaS application is underperforming. Because the user doesn't know, he doesn't know if it's Microsoft, the IT, doesn't know. So he complains to management, but he doesn't complain to the IT. So that's very difficult. So you could have some kind of statistics coming from each user, but in this case, you only have statistics when the users are working. And so the problem is you need to ensure a 24/7 environment, because if a problem is happening at night, I don't know, there's plenty of reasons for problem happening at night. There's patch management, there's DNS resolution that could change because another administrator made a mistake. There's plenty of different things. Upgrade. And so if anything happened during that time, then if you don't have a synthetic transaction, if you don't have something that tests continuously 24/7 the service, then as Nick just said, you are completely blind. And if you have to talk with Microsoft and because you have a problem at 8 a.m. in the morning that say, hey, all my users have a very bad experience on Teams, Microsoft, the first thing that they will ask you is, tell me exactly when the problem started. And you don't know if you don't have a way to measure the service continuously. You don't know when the problem started. You don't know what was the condition of your network at that moment. So you have no data to troubleshoot the issue, and Microsoft has no data to help you with that issue. So it's kind of very important to have this kind of synthetic transaction in place in order to have constant data, accurate data, and independent data from your user. Because the same, if you are relying on user data, so you are relying on people that potentially are watching YouTube or listening to Spotify while they are working, and how accurate are their performance data? You need to have something that you can compare. You need to have something that is accurate all the time, and that where you can have basically a service base that you can compare from location to location, or if you want to test your route to the cloud in order to see what are the impact of this or this infrastructure. So synthetic transaction, it's very important for all of these reasons, and what they are is exactly what you said. Basically, it's a way to simulate, not to simulate, to really to take an action on Office 365 exactly as a user. So it automates user action. It's an automation of user action, providing you with measure of the performance, of the availability, and of course, alert in case of anything happens. That's how I would define it. Sorry, it was a bit long.
No, that's okay. I like the automation of user action. That actually makes a lot more sense, and I love the fact that you corrected yourself saying it wasn't a simulation, because it isn't. It's actual action. So let's do this. I've got, I think it's 4 different areas in the next couple of slides here, maybe 3 different areas I want to talk about here. That we'd focus in on for you guys in the audience. So I have these, all 3 of them kind of titled the same way, which is all it takes is one downed or degraded service. That's all it's going to matter. If you have one down or degraded service, there's an issue here where users are going to start complaining. They're calling the help desk. Of course, they're going to say something as simple as like, I never got that email, or, or it won't let me in. I can't log on. I mean, just these very generic. We've all been there, right? I've been in IT for 25 years, so I've heard it all, as have you. And in this case, I want to focus in on kind of your edge servers, and I'll kind of also add in there your mail transport servers as well here. If you'd stay back, well, there we go. And in this case, if you look on the right-hand side, just focusing on edge servers here, if you don't have the right kinds of redundancy in terms of the way that your environment is architected here, there's a number of different aspects of Office 365 that are going to be impacted. And so you end up having things like you have your queues are going to back up. You're going to have some back pressure that gets created here. So you look at the different areas of outbound and inbound mail. Your edge servers are responsible for any kind of address rewriting that has to happen in the transport routing if there's something specific to a specific domain that's trying to go to, or a specific, in this case, it might be even Office 365 being used. But edge servers are kind of critical, and in this case, users may not actually even see that there's an issue because all they know is they're sending mail and it's gone from their Outlook, right? It's sitting in an outbox anywhere. It's just gone, so they think it's working, and of course, it's not being delivered, and they're not aware of it. And the idea here is you won't even be aware of it until someone says, "Hey, I'm not getting that message I was expecting," or something like that, or unless you're watching logs or something along those lines. And so, Jeff, maybe can you talk a little bit about how synthetic transactions would help identify a problem with edge servers, with mail routing, and that sort of thing?
Yeah, definitely. Well, mail routing, I will start by mail routing and then continue on edge server, because actually when you are testing your mail routing, you are also testing your edge server. So, but of course, it's not enough for the edge server. You need additional stuff, and I will show you that right after. Mail routing is key, especially in a hybrid environment. There are multiple pathways. It depends, of course, if you have an on-prem user and online user that want to communicate with each other, etc. But in any way, mail routing in a hybrid environment is highly complex, and it's very difficult. Again, if you don't have any tool, it's very difficult to test it. So I will show you first the real time that we do on mail routing, and explain you what you are watching here. So basically, again, GSX, the way we work exactly as Nick said before. We have a robot basically that you can install anywhere, and that robot is performing action constantly and tells you the performance, the up and down, but also the latency that is experienced by the end user. So here it will be the same for mail routing. So the robot is able to to do mail routing in multiple pathways. The first one would be an internal mail routing. So let's say, for example, you are online or on-prem and you want to send an email from one mailbox to the other. Super easy. And for that, we will calculate the average routing time, of course, and we will check as well the number of hops for each of these mail routings. So number of hops on an internal mail routing should be pretty low. Then we have the round-trip mail routing that can be online, or that can be on-prem as well. And we see the hybrid. The round-trip mail routing is a little bit different. In this case, the robot sends an email from a mailbox to an eco services that we own at GSX, and that eco services is basically sending back the email, and we check how long it takes to do this round trip of that mail. It's very interesting to do that, and usually it's one of the features that our customers really like, because it's a way to make sure that the email is able to go through all your infrastructure and your edge server, of course, going to internet, and then coming back from the internet, going through all your infrastructure and finish on a mailbox. So it tests really the full ability of your infrastructure, of your company, to send email outside and to receive email from outside. And that's, that's the first use of Exchange. That's for sure. So that's why it's very important to test that continuously, because, for example, we have some companies that still rely on email, for example, to do business. To do really critical business. Everybody is relying on email to do business. But for example, we have that company that is that trade material, and so the booking are made still through email. So if the email takes more than 1, 2, 3 minutes to arrive, it's potentially a lot of loss for the company. So the only way for them to make sure it doesn't happen is to monitor it. So we've seen internal mail routing for online and on-prem, round-trip mail routing, and of course we can do hybrid mail routing. And hybrid mail routing is a kind of the same thing. It's just that you'll take the robot, send an email from the on-prem server to an online mailbox, or you can send from the online to on-prem. And then you are checking really the ability for your hybrid environment to work together, for the online and on-prem to work together. And that's very, very important. And same thing, you will have so the mail routing average time, so you can control that in real time. And then you will have the number of hops. So for us in our environment, always the same. And what's important with the number of hops is not really what you have right now, it's the variation of hops. Because if it starts to become way higher than it was before, you are going to have a problem at some point. So it's very important to track that in order to anticipate potential mail routing problem that you will have. And then if you want to finish with the anticipation, reports that are a bit with a bigger time scale, let's say that, then you can go on Power BI and have the same kind of information but aggregated in order to check some trend, if you have any trend in terms of internal or external or routing time, checking again the average one and checking your hops as well. So the purpose here is to have way more, a bigger time scale to see if you are slowly running into a problem. So in order to predict a bit what's going to happen. So just to finish now on your question, so we saw the mail routing, we saw how important it is, and we saw that with a tool like GSX, you can really test that mail routing every 2, 3, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, the way you want, and make sure that your users are constantly able to send email from online to on-prem, from on-prem to the internet and come back, from online, etc. They can do all the scenarios. So now you can ensure the quality of services here. And then if you want to finish on the edge server, because actually, the edge server has a big part in this mail routing. So the first things to check is, of course, like the system health, so CPU, RAM, etc. We provide that. Our robot is able to connect to the edge server and retrieve this kind of information. Of course, the disk space could be great as well. It's always good to know if you are running out of disk space there. And then the queues. So the queues are very important. So here, I have to say on my edge server, my queues are pretty limited. It's pretty good. I don't have many mails in my queues. What you want to control, again, it's not really the number of mail right now, it's the variation. If you start to have a big number of email in your submission queue, that could be the marketing, that's for sure, but it can be as well other problematic things, and especially as well if they start to raise critically in your enrichable queue and in poison queue. So you need to be able to have a way to see that, to monitor that, in order, again, to predict any kind of failure that will greatly affect your business.
Good stuff, Jeff. Let's do this. Let's talk about the next one here, which is the idea of the connection between on-prem AD and Azure AD. And so we've got, of course, Azure AD Connect, and I've got one more. If you put one more bullet up there for me, Jeff. There we go. And so for you guys in the audience here, as you're thinking about just that one service isn't just responsible for things like syncing AD. That's the last thing I've got over on the right-hand side. There's a lot of other functionality that gets utilized as part of Azure AD Connect. So password hash sync, you see in there, pass-through authentication, and ADFS integration as well. The symptoms that you end up having are things like users saying, like, for example, they're saying, I can't even connect, to authenticate in the first place. That could actually be a problem with, it could be your DC on the left, could be an Azure AD component on the right. Now, but it also could be something with just purely authentication itself. Things like with the password hash syncs being off, the passwords aren't synced up in essence. It's something along those lines where the user can't truly authenticate, meaning they get to the service, but they can't actually get themselves authenticated in, and they don't know what the difference is. They don't know if that is my password. That's the ongoing thing we've all heard for years and years is that whole, you're mistyping your password. No, I'm not. I know what my password is, and usually it's the user. We all know that. But in this case, it's one of those things where it could actually be a problem with pass-through authentication. So understanding not just tying a user saying there's a problem and then tying it to where the problem is in the environment. That's one way that you could be utilizing synthetic transactions. But I think more so it's to proactively understand, are the different parts of the sync actually working? And then that way you have a better sense proactively, is there going to be an issue or who's having the issue? So for example, with passive authentication, somebody who maybe is on-prem but is trying to actually authenticate to Office 365, something along those lines, that could be a different issue from someone who's just simply authenticating on-prem. And you'd want to be able to tell the differences there by monitoring each of the different scenarios that represent your environment with synthetic transactions. So Jeff, how do you use synthetic transactions specifically to kind of help with these issues around both sort of Azure AD, and then I didn't really talk about it a lot, but the sort of the ADFS usage for those members of the audience that might be utilizing their on-prem domain controller to connect to more of a federated Active Directory?
Mm. Yeah, well, it's a good question. It's true, ADFS and Azure AD Connect. I mean, there can be, I mean, failure in this environment that really affects, of course, the end user. And the thing is that if you don't constantly check them, it's very difficult to troubleshoot, because when you have a user that say I cannot connect, it can be 100 different reasons. And if you have no way to isolate quickly the issue, you can spend a lot of time trying to address the issue. And we have that with customer, like basically that really ask us to do Azure AD Connect and ADFS, because they had plenty of issues, several issues where the user could not connect, and it took them so much time to troubleshoot at the end to realize that it was a dear problem. So what we do is that in terms of synthetic transaction, is that it's pretty simple. We use ADFS exactly as a user would use ADFS, even if a user doesn't really know that ADFS exists. But basically, we use it exactly for what it is. We give him a token, we send him a token, and we make sure that the token is passed to Office 365. And so we do a full scenario of authentication. And so thanks to that, we know exactly how long it takes for a user to authenticate on Office 365. And so you can track that, again, in real time, depending on the different robots that you have. And the other point that is very important, and that is a bit a stupid point, but very important point, is to track your certificate expiration date. Because, I mean, you don't want your certificate to expire on ADFS. Again, it's a very simple issue, but if it really happens, it can really cause a lot of problems for a lot of users. So here, with synthetic transaction, we are able to do a full authentication, and then for you to make sure that if a user cannot connect, you click on ADFS, you check if the robot can connect. If the robot can connect, you know it's at least it's not an ADFS issue. So you can isolate that issue. And of course, if you see an ADFS issue here, then you know that you have one, and you work on that to fix it. It's a bit the same with Azure AD Connect. So Azure AD Connect, we don't really do synthetic transactions for that. We do, again, a simple thing, but it's extremely important to monitor. It's basically when happened the last synchronization. Here on this one, I have an issue. That's definitely. I have an issue on DearSync configuration and on AD Connect configuration. So I can see directly that I have an issue. I can read the issue, and I can have some insights of, okay, I have a problem with AD Connect. My users are complaining. I know why. I know because I have a problem with the synchronization with Azure AD Connect. So basically, if they are already connected, fine. And if they're not connected and they want to connect again, then they might have an issue. But now directly, I have the reason of this problem. So that's why it's very important to be able to constantly see the status of this synchronization, see the last time it has been done, and see for ADFS. Again, how long it takes to authenticate, and is it possible for users to authenticate? And that's what we do with our tool.
Wonderful. The last thing we're going to talk about is the idea of user experience. So there's nothing really on the left-hand side. Really, everything here is going to be on the right-hand side. And as we click through this right there, there's a number of issues that I've got up here on the screen. And these are all sort of those issues that revolve around the user doesn't know what the problem is. This is like when they say, like, the internet's not working. right? We've all had that. The internet's down. Like you're qualified to tell me the internet's down, Mr. and Mrs. User, right? But the underlying factor here is that you all guys in the audience don't exactly know what the issue is. Like I gave the example early on of I sent an email to so and they never got it. Right. Now that could be anything up to and including you mistyped the domain name, moron. Right. But we don't know that yet. All you know is there's a problem, and you're not sure what the problem is. And yet at the same time, kind of thinking back to one of the first slides that I showed where you're talking about the efficiency and the availability, and I've added in there user experience as one of the things that you're expected to create a consistent experience for these users. This becomes one of the challenges where I see synthetic transactions actually helping quite a bit because of the ability to get granular in there to figure out what actually is and isn't functioning properly within the environment. So you take like GAL issues, maybe that's a DirSync problem, right? But that's maybe all it is. Mail not delivered could be a mail transport problem. Again, could be a fat-fingered domain name. We don't know. An inability to authenticate. Again, could be something with the passwords. Could be the problem with DirSync. Could be a problem with the DC not up and running. I mean, there's a lot of factors here that you're not watching for, unless some of you probably are still utilizing logs and a SIM solution, and you have some kind of alerting set up and those kinds of things, and that all makes perfect sense. But if you need to get a little more granular than is the service up and running or not, is especially when it comes to something like the last bullet I've got here, slowed response times. I'm just going to reference back to when Jeff was showing the mail transport, and he was the Edge server, and he was one of the last things he showed was things like memory and disk, and he was just going through the basic kinds of hardware on the machine that can actually impact performance. That's something that you may or may not have set up in looking at your log files, and you'd have to do some kind of performance monitoring and alerting or something along those lines on each of your servers. You may not even have that. And so these become a real challenge for organizations because, again, users don't necessarily know what's wrong, and they aren't supposed to know what's wrong. But then also you won't necessarily know what's wrong, and it may take you a long time to figure that out. So having the ability to quickly see what's going on is going to be of big help. So, Jeff, what are some of the other maybe user experience issues that you see, and then how are synthetic transactions used to help kind of identify those problems?
So we see a lot of different problems, of course, because I'm speaking with a lot of people, and they like to speak with us for that. And the thing is that the question is, what is a service? We all want to provide a better service quality, but how do you define the exchange service? I mean, exchange is a collection of plenty of different services. So we saw the mail transport and the email. So okay, let's say sending an email is a service, and being able to receive email is a big part of the service. But what about being able to create a meeting, being able to see when you do a meeting, being able to see if the potential attendees are available or not? That's the FreeBSD. What about being able to download an attachment? What about being able to create a task, etc.? All these actions are using different parts of Office 365 and potentially your network. And we know that because we work on plenty of cases where basically opening a mailbox, sending an email was perfectly fine, but FreeBSD was done. So it means that you can have a FreeBSD end user experience issue even if everything else is working fine. So if you are not constantly measuring all these, let's say, sub-services that are all these different actions that your users are doing, when you are in a hybrid environment, but also when you are pure online, I mean, you are missing a lot of issues, and then you are missing when the user will complain at some point, you won't have the data to solve that issue. So again, in terms of end user action that we've seen, especially for hybrid, the main one where really there was an issue was the FreeBSD in terms of hybrid environment. Like basically a user that is still on-prem, that is trying to create a meeting and check the availability of users that are online. But it's true in that direction, it's true in the other direction too. And so the FreeBSD here that we can see on these two different robots. So again, there are FreeBSD that can be done on-prem, online, in between on-prem and online, and that are very important to track. If I go back here on my Exchange environment, you can see in this Power BI template that each of the actions are really tested with synthetic transaction exactly exactly as a service. So we have the performance. We can know the performance, the latency, the availability of each of these sub-services for the user, and that's very, very important. So maybe another one that I wanted to show, I want to finish first with the FreeBSD. That's here, and if I just do Nice, you could see France. So here in Nice, we can see actually have a good setup for this environment. So you can see that the Nice hybrid is the one that is made, the FreeBSD Nice hybrid that is here. The blue line is the one that is performed from an on-prem server to an online. So checking if an online user is available from an on-prem server, and the Nice Online is checking and is doing that purely online. And so we can see that there's not that many difference in terms of performance between online and on-prem. Sometimes there's a more spike on the on-prem one, but it's kind of similar right here. But sometimes at some customer, it's completely different. And again, the thing is that you need to have this data to know what's going on. Otherwise, you're completely blind. And so it's true with FreeBSD. We have other type of scenario, the search as well. Sometimes I have some issue. And what's important at the end is to be able to understand globally what is your service performance for Office 365 or for your hybrid environment. And it's only by testing constantly with the synthetic transaction. So we saw the FreeBSD, we saw that there's plenty of other sub-services that you need to check, especially on Exchange. We could speak in another webinar about OneDrive, about Teams, about all the other workloads. But we have seen that it's extremely important to test all of that to have a sense of the global performance you are really delivering to your end user when you are in a hybrid environment. My answer.
Very good. So Jeff, let's do this. We have a couple of questions that have come in. I know we've ran over. We were planning on doing this for 30 minutes. Maybe we can take one or two quick questions if the audience is willing to stay on here a little bit, because I don't want to run them over. So a couple of questions that came in here, and I think you sort of addressed this first one, but I thought I'd ask anyway. So Shamil's asking, is there a possible way to not just check on the availability, which I think you've actually kind of shown that you're not just checking on availability of services, but actually going deeper. But they actually said latency from the end user side. And I was thinking about this in the context of when you were talking about, let's say, the mail routing, and you were showing, transport times. It's not exactly latency, but what can you show that you think is as close to latency, or can you actually show true latency?
Well, true latency for us, it will be can be again on mail routing or on any kind of a scenario that we do on Exchange. It's basically how long it takes for a user to do really that action. So the latency is basically every graph I show you here are latency graphs. So if I take my create meeting, so here I can see the latency for my robot user that is in Nice is 200 and 270 milliseconds. So I know the latency. I can define, of course, a threshold and be alerted if the latency is too high. But again, the purpose is to have constant data in order to be ready when there is an issue.
And then the other thing is, this actually ties into this same question, but also something that I wanted to ask you anyways. They were also talking about latency. They meant for on-premises scenarios. So how much of this, we've talked about hybrid Exchange, how much of this just applies or can be applied to those that are just, let's say, worried about their on-prem Exchange environments?
Well, all the synthetic transaction can be done just for on-premise environment. And the thing is, it's very important as well to do that because, when you're on-prem, you have plenty of stats for your server. So you know your server health, and that's great. So your server health is maybe 99%. Well, that's exactly that's kind of the same ratio than Office 365. So, okay, your server provides great services, but then the service that is experienced by your user rely, of course, on your server, but on everything in between your Exchange server and the end user. So it's again the ISP, it's again the local IT, it's again, I don't know, the router and all of that. So if you don't test it from where they are, you don't know the service that they really experience, even if your Exchange server have 100% availability and are really healthy. You never know what's going on at the other side of the world when you provide that service.
Excellent, excellent. Now, hopefully that'll help answer some of our audience's questions here. So I know that we're kind of at the tail end here. It looks like we've ran over by about 10 minutes. We do appreciate you guys staying on with us. Jeff, thanks for a great conversation today. I really do appreciate your input.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nick. It was great as well to discuss with you, and I hope it was good for the audience. And so just to say that in those times where Teams is really used more and more, we are scheduling a Teams dedicated webinar for April 7th. So of course, we will have all the information by email. Thank you very much, Nick.
Yeah, thank you. It was an honor to be here. For those of you in the audience here, thank you very much for your attention today. If I missed your question, someone from GSX will reach out to you personally, make sure that question gets answered. So please don't fret about that as well. There's an evaluation that's going to show up in your browser here, so be sure to take a moment to provide us with some feedback there. So thanks a lot, and you guys have a great day. We'll catch you on the next webcast.
Thank you. Bye bye.